Good evening and welcome to Q&A live from Elizabeth in South Australia. I'm Tony Jones and here to answer your questions tonight, the opposition leader, Bill Shorten. Please welcome our special guest. Thank you. Q&A is live in Eastern Australia on ABC TV, iView and News Radio. Join the Twitter conversation and join the discussion on Facebook. We're live from the Shedley Theatre in Elizabeth on the northern outskirts of Adelaide. Elizabeth was once the home of Holden and a Labor stronghold, but Holden is gone and times are changing. Bill Shorten's party is leading in the polls, but there's no guarantee he can win the top job. And he's facing some difficult questions tonight. The first, on this Queen's birthday holiday, comes from Dylan Wood.
Mr. Shorten, I've recently heard you on the radio saying that you would like a republic. But we know from America's example that the republic system is not as effective at making laws as our Westminster system. Apart from damaging our relationship with Britain and spending a whole load of taxpayer money on the referendum and restructure, why would we, as a nation of people who don't fix something if it isn't broken, vote to change our constitution in a referendum which costs millions of dollars that could be better spent on education or health?
Over to you, Bill.
Because after over 200 years of European settlement, this country is ready to have an Australian head of state. I don't believe we need to keep borrowing a monarch from another country. She's a very good person and she's done a very good job. I don't accept that if we have an Australian head of state that we immediately become the United States. That isn't how it would work, and that isn't what people who are pushing for an Australian head of state. But at the end of the day, it isn't a question that if we become a republic, we don't have money for schools and hospitals. That's not a fair comparison, in my opinion, Dylan. I think what we need to do is recognise that if we are to be a truly independent nation, we should at least have as our head of state someone who is an Australian citizen.
Just a quick follow-up, Bill. The head of the Republican movement, Peter Fitzsimons, has written to the Prime Minister and suggested it might be a good idea to vote, citizens to vote for the Governor-General, the next Governor-General, as a kind of trial for voting for a head of state. Do you support that idea?
Well, I actually think that the way we currently do our Governor-General appointment is one issue. I think that what we should do is ask the Australian people what sort of republic we want. And I actually think that when we have a republic, it can't just be the new head of the Australian Republic, who could well be called the Governor-General. I actually think we're going to need to invite the Australian people to have a role in selecting the Australian head of state. It can no longer just be
vote,
done.
because this is one of the issues that stopped the Republican movement in its tracks when Malcolm Turnbull was the head of the Republican movement.
They were the days. What I would say is that there should be two questions asked to the Australian people. The first question is, do we want an Australian head of state? Let's have that debate. Dylan, you've got a view. Plenty of people have got views. I want to hear from the Australian people their opinion on that question. And if the Australian people say that we do want an Australian head of state, then we would have a further vote or discussion and a process to involve the Australian people, how we select that Australian head of state. And by the way, there was just something which just comes to mind. You said that if we would damage our relations with the United Kingdom if we became a republic, if we had our own head of state, plenty of other Commonwealth countries have moved to have their head of state from their own country and still maintain perfectly close ties with the United Kingdom. Many of them competed in the Commonwealth Games, so we'll still be in the Com Games. I think Prince Charles or King Charles, or you know, when he's the king, I think he'll still like Australia. It won't damage our relations. We will just send a big message to the rest of the world that when you talk to Australia, we're an independent country. We're not borrowing a monarch from the other side of the world.
Plus Britain's running out of friends since Brexit. Let's move on to our next question. Jason Noble.
Mr. Shorten, what do you hope to achieve by adopting a strategy of dividing the Australian community by presenting a them and us conflict for employees and employers by depicting a battle between capital and labour that was born out of the Industrial Revolution? Is it not in the best interest of the productivity of the modern Australian economy to adopt the more modern approach of employees and employers working collaboratively together to achieve outcomes that drive economic growth, job satisfaction and profitability that would benefit all Australians?
I think there's two issues in that, Jason. The first one was clearly about workplace relations and what should relationships be like at work. Now, I actually don't believe that in conflict in the workplace. I don't actually think that that is the way forward for the future. But workplace relations can be made overcomplicated too. I've got a golden rule about workplace relations, and this is the view I had when I was a union rep, and it's the view I've had when I've employed people. I've been on both sides of the equation. It is that to have good employment relations, just treat your employees like you would like someone to treat a member of your family if the member of your family was working for that person. Like, we really complicate industrial relations in this country. To me, it's as basic as that. And if we have that approach, then I think that's how we advance. That's not them and us, that's people working together. But what I also recognise in your question is, the debate about the role of representation in the workplace, or the argument that do people need protections at workplaces? And I think they do. The reality is that employees, when they negotiate their labour, it's not like buying a loaf of bread at the shop, as someone once famously said. The aim is to get the lowest price. People, when they go to work, do need some protections. And I think that there is nothing wrong with having a regulated labour market which ensures that people get paid their penalty rates, which ensures that you get your public holidays. Today's a public holiday. That didn't happen merely because some employer gave it to the workforce. It didn't happen in the 19th century or the early part of the 20th century that some employer woke up and said, gee, I feel like giving you a holiday today and I'm going to pay you penalty rates if you come to work. It's because there's been a process of unions advancing the case of a strong safety net at work. So, no, I don't believe in us and them in the workplace. I believe it's a matter of cooperation, but I also recognise...
Bill, I'm just going to interrupt you for a moment because I suspect what our questioner is getting at is a radical form of new cooperation between workers and employers. For example, profit sharing or employees being paid partly in shares so that they have some kind of stake in the profitability of a company.
Well, I don't think that's actually a radical new thing to propose some form of profit sharing, to propose, giving some bonus shares to people. So, again, that all makes sense. But where it can go wrong is when, if you like, the profit sharing or the at-risk component of people's pay it replaces the base rate of pay. The banks, I think, have gone too far down the radical path of saying that, a bank teller's pay, some of it can be as your guaranteed pay, but the rest of it depends on how many mortgages you sell, how many credit cards you sell. I believe in a strong safety net. And the beauty of a strong safety net is that means that those workers who get paid properly at work have got money to spend in their community. The problem at the moment in Australia is that we've got mounting inequality. The problem in Australia is not that somehow workers are getting too much. The real problem is that corporate profits are going up and up and up, but wages have stagnated. That isn't the deal which workplace relations should be delivering. We're
going to be talking more about that in a minute. I just want to go back to our questioner. Jason, when you're talking about a different relationship between workers and their bosses, what do you actually mean? So we'll get a microphone to you. Just hang on for 1 second. Yep, one of those microphones. Thank you very much. Go ahead.
Well, I think that the majority of businesses and employers understand that their employees are their most valuable asset, and to empower them to have a more say in making the business profitability and have an understanding that if they're invested in the business themselves, that it'll be a better outcome for all concerned.
So is that what you meant, something like profit sharing or...
Definitely, yes.
Share arrangements? Yeah. OK. Well, you haven't rejected that, but unions generally don't like it, do they?
No, that's not fair. I don't reject that, but I don't want it to replace a proper rate of pay. I've negotiated bonus schemes, but you've got to get the proper rate of pay. You've got to make sure that people are getting a fair day's wage for a fair day's work. I mean, the problem with bonus schemes that I've seen is that when it was for blue-collar workers, the bonuses tended to be 1 or 2% of your pay. Well, that's not really incentive. In my experience, though, bonuses have meant something else at the top end of town. The problem in Australia is that corporate executives in the banking sector have been paid massive bonuses for selling product out the door, and that sometimes brings with it disastrous consequences for consumers of banks. So I like the idea of people working together. That's what I've always aimed at doing, bringing people together, but you've got to make sure there's a strong safety net.
OK. Marilyn Baker is our next question.
Thank you, Mr Shorten. Due to the decline of manufacturing in our council, our area is now creating a second CBD for Adelaide, including health and sporting precincts, trying to create employment. And as a result, our residents are becoming more aspirational. But with the current level of cynicism with our politicians and politics in general, how are you going to engage with the next generation of voters, and why should the Labor movement be important to them?
Well, there's a lot of issues in that, Marilyn. Thank you.
Try and keep to about a minute because we've got quite a lot of questions.
Sorry, Marilyn. Today, when I came to Elizabeth in preparation for coming here tonight, I had the opportunity for the local federal member, Nick Champion, who actually gave up some of his wife, Fiona's birthday, to come and brief me. I met former auto workers. I met a farmer who's running a packing business, and I met a pharmacist. And I said to them, what's happening in Elizabeth? What do you think needs to be done? And they said the demise of the car industry was a betrayal by the federal government. They felt they should have done more to defend it. But having said that, they said that the region's got a lot of get up and go. They told me that it's been a big shock for the auto workers. I met men who were in their third generation of auto workers. They'd worked here, families, 3 generations. To lose that permanent work, you know, a good pay, and to have to start again's come as a big shock. But what they also said to me, despite all of the psychological pressure, the loss of identity, is that people are giving it a go. So I've heard a bit about what you've been doing, Marilyn, and the council and others. I think the future of this region is be a health precinct, be a sport hub, be an advanced manufacturing facility here, operations here. Just behind me, I've got the Elizabeth TAFE. Let's train some more apprentices to do jobs in this country rather than rely on other people coming here. You know, down the road at RAF Edinburgh, you've got the Air Force, you've got the Army, you've got highly skilled men and women, defence industry. So I like the story of this region. It's a story where you've got good food areas, agricultural areas around it. So this is sport, this is health, this is defence industry, this is advanced manufacturing, and I'd also like to put a plug in for this region. You've got a lot of engineering skills here. Why not do more renewable energy? If we get elected, we're going to put some certainty back into renewable energy so people will invest. That'll create smart jobs, that'll create ongoing sustainable work, and let's train up our apprentices. That's what I'd like to do here.
Okay. All right, let's go to next question. Oh, sorry, Marilyn's got a hand up. Oh, you can come back in quickly, yep.
That was the first part of my question.
You did ask about transparency and how we improve confidence. I'll do quick rapid fire, three rapid fire. 1, I'll improve confidence in Australian politics by 1, a national anti-corruption commission. 2, I'll get rid of foreign donations out of our system. And 3, if you want to give more than $1,000 to a political party, you're going to have to tell us who you are. They're 3 items of trust.
Okay, Marilyn, just make your... Are you happy that you've been answered now? Are you happy you've heard your answer now?
I'd just like to know how you think that you're going to make yourself relevant to the next generation of voters.
Okay, I'm going to leave that question hanging. We'll take it as a comment because we've got questions on that coming up. Let's go to an aspirational voter from the region, Ingo Yerker.
Mr. Shorten, how do you want to sell the proposed discontinuation of negative gearing to low and middle income mum and dad investors who may only be able to invest in a property, for example, with the help of the current tax rules?
First of all, if you currently negatively gear, we're not going to change the rules for you because you've invested under these laws. I need to repeat that. If you currently negatively gear, the rules don't change for you because you've invested under the current rules. But in the future, if we get elected, we have formed the view that in a beauty parade between properly funding our hospitals and our schools and our TAFE and our universities, or giving property investors the chance to get a tax subsidy for an investment property, I'm going to pick the schools and the TAFEs and the unis. Now, you used the term the low-income people who are using negative gearing. In my experience, banks do not lend money to poor people to negatively gear. What you're describing, in part, is that after people have been able to avail themselves of a tax concession, a subsidy from the government, they're able to minimise their income. So if you look at their annual, tax return, it looks like they're a person on a low income. But I challenge people to find a whole lot of your friends who earn $60,000 and $50,000 a year and see if they're actually getting the bank to lend them money to buy an investment property. It's all about choices. It is not wrong if you negatively gear now. That's the tax laws as it is. But we've got to live within our means, and then we've got to make priorities. My opposite number, Mr Turnbull, wants to back negative gearing, forever. He wants to back the big companies getting a tax cut. I want the local Lyle McEwen Hospital to get the $2.5 million that's being cut in the next 3 years. I want to give them that money rather than give people who've already got a fair amount of money further support from the taxpayers. It's all about choices.
OK, we've got another question on this. I'm going to go straight to it. It's from Ashraf Hussaini.
Mr Shorten, abolishing negative gearing would ultimately lead to less rented properties being available and much higher rental costs. How does this benefit the youth and vulnerable members of the society?
Thank you for your question, Ashraf. I actually think there are better ways to help young people than give a tax subsidy to property investors. The idea that negative gearing was invented by Robin Hood to help the poor against the well-off, I just don't buy. You're right that there's a challenge around rental properties. You're right that there's a challenge around homelessness. You know how we solve homelessness? We build more houses. And we're also saying for negative gearing going forward, you can still do it for new housing. So in fact, if housing stock is the challenge, you'll still be able to negatively gear on prospective housing, but not on existing housing. My concern with negative gearing is it takes a big lump of taxpayer money and it subsidises some people who've got the opportunity to take advantage of it to make more money. I worry about the homeless. I worry about the first home buyers. Is it fair in this country that you go to an auction and you've been saving up, your parents are there, you may be in your early 30s, and you find that that price that you were quoted all of a sudden jumps by another $100,000 and it's a property investor who's outbidding you courtesy of the taxes you're paying to Canberra. That's not fair in my opinion.
OK, just to go to his question though, how can you make sure in government you don't create a rental crisis?
Because we'll build more houses through social housing. And because, there you go. We won't go long.
OK, we've got another question on housing from Joseph Acott.
Would a Labor government support banning sales of Australian houses and land to non-permanent residents to help my generation be able to afford and buy a house in the future?
Yeah, I do think that we need to not make it as easy as it has been for foreign investors to come and buy up Australian housing stock. If people want to buy a house and come and live here, that's fine. But if what they're doing is just investing in the Australian residential property market as a hedge against whatever may happen in their own country, I think that is challenging. My priority is for young Australians to be able to afford to buy their first home. That's the filter or the lens I apply. OK, so just to understand that a little more clearly,
non-residents currently cannot buy existing dwellings, but only new housing or new dwellings that are built. And the argument is that helps the construction industry, that creates jobs.
I think there's something in that.
Yeah, so, I mean, would you keep that?
Well, we still want to incentivise the building of new housing. Building a new house employs 40 different trades and skills. So what we're doing with our negative gearing policy, and indeed our view about foreign investors into the residential housing market, is this. I want to make sure that Australians have a level playing field when they bid for that apartment or house. But what I also want to do is incentivise the building of new housing stock. So that's why we would keep more incentives for houses not yet built, because frankly, that creates more jobs. I live in Moonee Ponds in Melbourne's inner or northwest, where there are a lot of new apartments being built there. I worry sometimes about overdevelopment, but what I am committed to is seeing that we can create jobs for construction workers and small businesses.
So you'd keep the rules that allow non-residents to buy houses that are being built? You'd keep that, would you? That houses have already been built or that are on the plan? No, they're not allowed to buy houses that have already been built. Houses on the plan, houses being built.
We don't want to pull up the drawbridge entirely, but my priority in our policy will be for Australians who want to buy residential property. And that's the policy lens we'll apply.
OK, remember, if you hear any doubtful claims on Q&A, let us know on Twitter. Keep an eye on the RMIT ABC Fact Check and the Conversation website for the results. The next question comes from Maddie Saar.
So we're feeling the effects of climate change all around the country, but Australia's biggest new coal mine is still on the table and your party has provided no real opposition to it. You've spoken about renewable energy, but Adani's coal mine would make it impossible for us to have a safe climate in the future. So why haven't you opposed it?
In terms of the... Yeah, I don't think that's quite fair that I've said that I haven't said things about the Adani coal mine. I have actually, and the government's attacked me for being a sceptic of Adani, just to set the record straight, Maddie. But what I'm not going to do is create sovereign risk. My view on Adani is this. Does it stack up commercially? Well, they've missed so many deadlines, it's quite remarkable. Australian banks won't back it in. I don't want a single dollar, and this is again, Maddie, I just need to respectfully disagree a bit here on this one. We have said in Labor federally, and we've said before the last federal election, that not a single dollar of Commonwealth taxpayer money should be used directly or indirectly on that mine. So I think that makes our attitude quite clear. But when it comes to the bigger picture, which is what you started with about renewable energy and the need to act on it, my party has such a different policy to the government. And we get lambasted by the conservative media and by by the government every day, but we are not going to shirk away from our task. We should get to 50% renewable by 2030. We do need to maintain our Paris targets. We are absolutely committed to providing certainty for investors in renewable energy, and we are going to make renewable energy an issue at the next federal election with a very clear difference to the current government.
Okay, I'm just going to quickly go back to Maddie. Did you get an answer to your question?
I guess so, but I'd just like to say that real leadership on climate change means no new coal in Australia, and we want something stronger on that.
Well, again, as much as I want you to vote for me, I've got to tell you this. We are so much better than the Liberals on climate change, it's not funny. But what I'm not going to do is say to everyone that, coal is not going to be part of our energy mix going forward. And anyone who pretends to you otherwise is kidding you. But what we will do is put in policies which see a greater use of gas and also move towards renewable energy, because I think the future is renewable energy. But what I'm not going to do is leave behind some of those coal mining communities where they're digging up the coal now, be it for export or indeed for use in Australia. Okay,
let's go back to what's actually happening here in Elizabeth. And the next question is from Charlie Robinson.
I worked at Oldham's plant for 30 years, but I haven't been able to find regular employment since it closed. What will you and the Labor government do to combat casualisation in the workforce and give us back our pride?
Charlie, before I answer, can you tell us what you did at Holden? Were you on the line or in a...
I was
assembly?
a press operator in the press shop for 30 years, and I was a multi-skilled person. I did fork truck, dry truck, crane operation, and all that time I became a union rep, and I was proud to do that, to find and fight the times that we were in in 87, and I enjoyed every moment of that time doing that, and I helped a lot of people along the way doing that type of work.
Thank you, Charlie. The reason why I asked that is not everyone knows about manufacturing, but I've represented press operators in the past. And you used a term there which I just want to perhaps, not challenge, but just build you up a bit here. You said you were multi-skilled. You still are multi-skilled. And this is the point which I want to make. I am still angry every day that Abbott and Hockey did nothing to save the car industry. And before people say that's the way of the world, oh no, it's not. Other countries still make a car from woe to go in first world economies and pay good wages, and their governments help them. I am going to be angry every day for the rest of my life about...
Angry enough to bring back the car industry?
Well, here's the full answer out. I'm talking to Charlie first. Because you know what? I don't know, I wasn't trying to be funny when I said here the full answer out. I'm sick of blokes and women in their in their late 40s and 50s who get thrown on the scrap heap because someone says it's not economically rational. I don't think it's economically rational to give the big banks $17 billion, but apparently that's called, trickle-down economics. That's Mr Turnbull's whole plan. I think it was irrational to let the car industry go. And another fact I want to say, not that Charlie needs me to say on behalf of him, but on others, is that up to the very day that the last car rolled off at Elizabeth, they were quality cars. And it may not be a well-known fact in Australia because we all get told by the media, we're not into manufacturing. But you know what's the case? The Elizabeth plant was recording the best numbers, the best OH&S, the best quality of any of the Holden plants. So, Charlie, the first thing I want to say to you, and through you to thousands of others, is that you're valuable, you're respected. Now, you go to the issue of casualisation. And by the way, just say to everyone else, people say this is the way of the world. Everyone can pick up a job being an Uber delivery person or something. Well, spare me. I don't actually believe that. And what's happened is that we need to have manufacturing back in this country. So, do I say that we're going to start rebuilding cars from scratch? No, I think the current vandals in Canberra have wrecked that proposition. But what I do say is that we can do advanced manufacturing in this country. Labor has a proposal on the table to set up an advanced manufacturing fund so we can provide money to manufacturing businesses, loans, so they can back themselves in. And the other thing we'll do, Charlie, is for you, if you're working perhaps in another sector, I'm sick and tired of labour hire companies who rely on casualised labour undermining people's conditions.
Okay.
I want to give you more rights.
Charlie had his hand up, and I go back to you, Charlie. I've got a quick question for you myself, which is what actually happened after you lost your job? Because we got told there were these transition plans that were meant to take people and put them into full-time jobs.
The transition that we received and we have been receiving has been good stuff. Not a problem. It's computer training and all that along them lines. But in the real world out there, computer training is no good to no one if you can't get through the door.
That's right.
And that's where it comes to the casualisation.
Yeah. I think you've sort of answered that. I'm going to move on to our next question, which is on the same topic. It's from Madison Kennewell.
I'm 22 and I live locally in Hillbank. I'm unemployed, but I've participated in medical trials and studies for short-term income. Both my parents and some of my 4 siblings have also struggled to find work. Since the closure of the Holden plant and the economic restructuring throughout this region, I'm really concerned with the current and future job prospects that I and other young people will face. So what hope can you bring to young people like us to find jobs?
Well, I outlined a little bit to Marilyn some of the sectors which I think are strengths here. And I've outlined a bit imperfectly to Charlie that we've got a proposal called a manufacturing fund, an advanced manufacturing fund to help finance. But the promise I want to make you, building on those last 2 answers, is I reckon that if you get the chance to go to a TAFE or indeed university, you're probably going to do quite well. So what we've proposed is paying the upfront fees for 100,000 apprenticeship courses over the next 3 years. Now, by the way, before the sceptics say, how can you pay for that? Well, I'm not giving the $17 billion to the banks and the big multinationals. What I want to do is give young people the chance to do apprenticeships. Now, I mentioned universities. We're going to uncap places at universities, which will allow universities in the next decade to offer 200,000 extra places. But I particularly tonight want to talk to you about apprenticeships. There are 2 or 3 messages I get when I talk to workers in this region. One, why don't we get the young people in to do apprenticeships? No, there's a lot of good jobs if you've got your apprenticeship. So we've got a plan to help get you an apprenticeship. The second thing workers and small businesses say to me in the region is we should be training up our own rather than bringing people in on temporary visas from overseas. So we're going to clamp down on that. I have a very simple philosophy. No temporary visa worker should be here for a day longer than it takes to train an Australian. And I think the third thing which we need to do here is we need to stop waving goodbye to our industries. That's why I'm such a fan not only of the defence build, but I'm a big fan of renewable energy. Because we've got smart people in this country, we've got smart people in this region. Look, we are capable of doing it. We've got to stop handing away our jobs overseas. So TAFE, university, and of course creating opportunities working with councils and working with some of our sunrise industries, so you've got jobs to go to.
I want to go back to Maddie and see what she thinks about that, so let's get a microphone to you. While we do that, just bear in mind that the unemployment rate here is 33%.
Yeah.
And so it's the question that Maddie and others in this audience are indicating is they want to know what governments are going to do for their region, this crisis-struck region. Would you in government focus on areas like this with, double-digit and more unemployment?
So I answer you both. Was that the point you wanted to make, Maddie, or...? Okay. It's always hard when you talk about tough times. Do you focus on the doom and gloom or do you focus on the good news? I even had that challenge, funnily, ironically enough, at Beaconsfield in the mine. Do you say they're in real danger or do you say it'll all be right? What I learnt then and those miners taught me and what my people I've represented my whole adult life have taught me is just tell it straight. So, yep, unemployment is unacceptably high here. My plan is to get people apprenticeships. Get people to university if they want to, but get them apprenticeships. We are a tradie nation. 1.6 million Australians are qualified tradespeople, but in the last 5 years under the coalition government, we've gone back 420,000 apprentices down to 280,000. Yet at the same time, we're bringing in more people with temporary work visa rights than ever before. So it's apprenticeships, I think, is the good second chance which drives it. And I mentioned earlier, and this is why, yes, I loathe the fact that the government did nothing to defend the car industry, but what I won't do is say this region is all bad news. And I know the council, and I've been speaking to Nick Champion, the local member, they are working on a health precinct. They are working on tourism, a sport hub. They are working on utilising our defence industry and the related jobs that come from there. So there is good news here as well, but it's just, I'm just sorry that this region's been subjected to, if you like, neglect and indifference, and now people have got to work it through themselves. But I promise you, if we get elected, Maddie, get you in an apprenticeship, let you get control of your life, and I reckon if you give people half a chance, they are capable of doing just about anything.
Okay, I'm going to quickly go back to Maddie. You've heard what the opposition leader has said. Do you buy it?
I think that even though the idea of having an apprenticeship or going to university is a viable long-term solution for jobs, there's still that immediate short-term. Rent has to be paid, groceries need to be bought.
Yeah, right.
Unless those are paid apprenticeships and unless university students can find employment that works around a university schedule and aren't affected by casualisation or underemployment, there are still significant difficulties here.
You're right, and that's why...
Thanks, guys.
No, but
we'll run out of time if you do that every question.
You're right, Matt. You're right, Maddie, and that's why I wish there was an election this Saturday, because I can't do anything till we get elected. But in the meantime, I would say to the government, if they wanted to help young people pay their bills, maybe they wouldn't cut their penalty rates. And if we wanted to help people a bit more, maybe we should be in there providing apprenticeship support now rather than cutting TAFE and privatising TAFE.
Okay, we thank Madison Kennewell for that, and we'll move on to our next questioner, which is Lex van Blyenberg.
Mr. Shorten, a business can only pay its employees out of the dollar value of what they create for the business's customers. A rule of thumb for small businesses is an employee must generate about 3 times what they're paid. The balance goes to business overheads as well as hopefully some profit to pay down debt, invest for the future and put food on the business owner's table. For a small business owner to pay his employees an extra 3.5% in wages, he has to either put his prices up or reduce his personal income. If prices are put up, then it becomes a merry-go-round of wage rises and price rises, triggering further inflation. Who do you think will really benefit from the latest minimum wage rise?
What sort of business are you in, Lex? Or was that a general question? Or was
No, I own a business. It's an automotive workshop. Small business.
Well, first of all, when it comes to automotive workshops, I've got some good news for you. Labor has said that we want to take on the big foreign car companies because, let's face it, we're not making cars here anymore, and we want them to release a lot more of their diagnostic information and software. These days, motor cars are essentially computers on wheels, the new ones. But what's happened is that the independent mechanics business, the automotive workshop business in Australia, and there's 23,000 businesses like yours, are not getting their fair share because if you like, the big foreign companies are controlling the after-service system. So we've said that we want to help provide change the rules so that automotive workshops aren't being squeezed in the way they are. That's a specific issue of your industry. But let me go to the general point about, should we increase the minimum wage and is it too high? Well, I'd say it is a good thing when the minimum wage goes up. Because what we need in this country, more than a low minimum wage, is we need economic confidence. People who earn $50,000 and $60,000 and $70,000 a year don't save a lot of money. They spend it. So when you lift the minimum wage of people, what happens is that there's more money circulating in the economy. Most people I know who are on $40,000 and $50,000 and $60,000 and $70,000 a year, they're not saving a lot of money. So I actually think when we lift the minimum wage, what we see is more people having a better quality of life and they spend more money, which is ultimately what all businesses need. If people can't afford to replace the tyres on their car, they're not going to go to the automotive workshop.
So automatically in government, would you push for the minimum wage to go up higher than 3.5% that it is? Obviously, it's going to go up on a regular basis, but would you be pushing for much higher rises in the minimum wage?
The minimum wage decisions are set by the Fair Work Commission. I am concerned that wages have stagnated in this country. I think there's probably other policies I would pursue to help lift wages in this country. Like one thing which bugs me is that we've got feminised industries, and maybe that sounds like a $50 word but concept, but what I mean is in aged care or in childcare, what we have is preponderantly women-dominated workforces. It is my opinion that partly as a result of the fact that they're female-dominated, their pay is relatively less than male-dominated industries. I think another example of what we could do is we could clamp down on labour hire companies being brought into a business to replace a section of the workforce and that the people working at the labour hire company get paid less. That's suppressing wages. So I think there are a number of mechanisms which will provide a better outcome in terms of wages, common sense stuff. And I think that's the way to go.
Let me quickly just go back to Lex, because I suspect what he was saying is you don't understand small business and the stress of actually making profit from a small business and employing people as wages go up. What's your point now, hearing what Bill Shorten just said?
Apart from the fact that I don't think the question was really answered, which was who do you think will really benefit from the latest minimum wage rise?
The economy.
The point is that in a small business, I can only pay my employees out of what we produce, in other words, what we sell into the marketplace. To give my people a 3.5% pay rise, in round figures, I need to produce 10% more of something. I either need to put my prices up by 10% or improve productivity by 10%, or otherwise I take a 10% pay cut, which is a zero-sum game. So I pay my employees more, but I end up with less. And that doesn't help me. It doesn't really help my employees because, well, maybe it does help the employees, but it certainly doesn't help me.
Well, OK, Lex, you actually went to a good point about productivity. How does value get created? My first argument in favour of regularly increasing the minimum wage is it means that people are spending more, consumption's up. And it's just good for them too. But my second argument, which I mentioned about how Labor's the only party who's looking after independent mechanical workshops, but the third thing about productivity is this. I actually think that when you, as a small business person, take a risk, you invest in new diagnostic equipment, new lifting equipment, whatever the particular technology you require to improve productivity. If Labor gets elected the next election, we've said that we're going to put an extra 20% tax deductibility on any equipment you purchase over $20,000. Now, we're doing that because we think that employers and companies and enterprises who make the decision to invest capital to improve productivity, to be able to generate that value, the employees, your own share, we're prepared to increase the ability of what you can deduct by 20%. So I hope that gives you at least some relief. And of course, for all businesses under $2 million, Labor is the same as the government. We're going to lower your corporate tax rate to 25% for small businesses.
You're watching Q&A live from Elizabeth in South Australia with the opposition leader, Bill Shorten. The next question comes from David Dix.
Mr. Shorten, I'm a 15-year-old from Elizabeth who is concerned about the future. We have growing levels of income inequality. It is very difficult to enrol on any form of income assistance, and even for many full-time and part-time and casual workers, it is hard to afford rent. So will you not only take a stand against privatisation of public housing and other essential services, but also support renationalising essential services and invest in public housing, as has been the policy of UK Labor leader Jeremy Corbyn, New Zealand Labor Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern, and also the Australian Greens?
Thank you, David. Labor will invest in social housing. We've got more policies to announce. I mean, tonight's probably not the night where we're going to announce every policy we've got before the election. But in all seriousness, I think you're right. And I've said to earlier questions as well that we need to create more social housing so people have accommodation options. I'm not interested in privatising further public housing. I think that we don't have enough public housing stock as it is in this country right now. We need to lift the public housing stock. When you talk about renationalising, I'm not going to renationalise the means of production, though. I think that horse has bolted on some of those. And
essential services, he was saying, renationalising essential services.
Ones?
Well, I'm not sure. He's asking the question.
Yep.
Go ahead.
Such things might include electricity, so like a public electricity retailer to start with, or a public internet service retailer like for the NBN or whatever it is, but just to provide lower cost services to Australians. And that would not interfere with the market too much because you would actually allow prices to be controlled, because privatisation under both Liberal Labor governments has destroyed a lot of, has worsened income inequality.
I think you're right that some privatisation has backfired. I live in Victoria. I think some of the privatisation of the power industry there, they got such good prices for it when they were selling it that every subsequent private owner has tried to sweat the assets to recover the cost, and as a result, our power prices have gone up. I am not going to say, though, tonight that I think you can simply buy back the privatised power assets, but I do believe...
That's what Tony Abbott wanted to do.
Sometimes. When he was undermining Mr Turnbull, that's when he wants to do it, when he was in charge.
No, I know.
So I'm not going to take lectures from Abbott on privatisation, that's all I'm saying.
But what about Jeremy Corbyn and some of those other Labor figures? That was part of his point, though, that he's watched what's happening in Corbyn's Labor Party in Britain and Ardern's Labor Party in New Zealand, and you could throw in Bernie Sanders in the United States. All of these have attracted a lot of young voters, and I'm wondering whether David might be in that camp and whether you'll be going down that path.
No, I'm not going to spend taxpayer money buying back the privatised electricity assets. But what I will do to get lower prices is we'll get over the climate change wars and we'll just say, yep, renewable energy is part of our future. Yep, we want to encourage greater investment. The single biggest driver of electricity prices in this country is the inability to form a sensible policy on climate change. I genuinely thought when Malcolm Turnbull took over from Mr Abbott, that at least the climate change debate would end. It's actually got worse. So that's why I was saying earlier to Maddie's question and to you, I think the best way to put downward pressure on power prices is to make a very clear policy that you back renewable energy, and in doing that, that'll provide the investment certainty, and then we'll get the competition and we'll get the Australian know-how, and we'll get the jobs, and we'll get the climate change benefits that we want.
Very briefly, you don't see Jeremy Corbyn as a model you'd like to emulate?
On which issue?
On these kind of issues.
Well, what I'm not going to do to people is tell them that you can just have anything you want. I know it's a unicorn policy to say that we're going to buy back all the electricity assets, because how much do we pay for it then? And then what have I got to give up if I pay billions and billions of dollars for these assets? My priority, if we get elected, and there's a lot of work to be done on a lot of issues, get our health system right, properly fund our hospitals, properly fund our Medicare, our primary health. Make sure that in the early years of school you can get the childcare without being disadvantaged, as is currently happening. Make sure that our schools are properly funded, that we look after our TAFE and our universities. They're my priorities, and to sort out the wages system so people get a fair go at work.
Okay, next question, very different subject. Stuart Johnston.
Mr Shorten, my mum was one of many victims of abuse at the now closed Oakden Aged Care Facility here in South Australia. Multiple inquiries confirm there is a national crisis in aged care, where our most vulnerable are suffering abuse, neglect and inadequate care. The entire Aged Care Act needs overhauling, and a Royal Commission considered to truly expose this sector and fix it. Mr Shorten, will you support this call as proactively and determined as you did with the Banking Royal Commission, and implement it if elected, and return Australia back into the status of caring for our most vulnerable where and how we should be?
Stuart, I'm sorry about what's happened to your family. That's the first thing. And successive governments should have got that and they didn't. I think you're right. There is a problem in aged care. When I said that there was a crisis in aged care a few months ago, the government attacked me. Well, that's sort of what they do. But they said, they actually said it was elder abuse to say there's a crisis in aged care. You know, that's what they said in Parliament. You've engaged in a form of elder abuse. I think telling the truth is not elder abuse. As for a Royal Commission, I don't know. I can see the case that you make. I want to give you some definite policy markers that we've got. One is, I don't think that the quality standards are working. You know, what you see on paper is not what you get. Any one of you who's got a family member in a facility, you know, it really just depends on the hard work of the staff. But you do wonder, the inspection system isn't working the way it should. I want to do a little survey right here because dementia is a big issue as well. 420,000 of our fellow Australians are already diagnosed as living with dementia now. How many people in this facility, in this forum here, have a member who's been diagnosed with dementia or knows a family where someone's been diagnosed with dementia? I just want to do a show of hands. Well,
I'll put up my hand as well.
Yeah, so
in our family.
That was 70% of the room. So, Stuart, I think you're right. And I think there is a crisis. And some of the things we want to do, we want to make dementia one of the key factors, key policies. It is not something you add on at the end of a speech. It's at the core of how we treat. A country who can't treat its old people properly isn't the country that it wants to see in the mirror. I think we've got to look after the aged care workforce better too. They're not paid enough. We don't have the necessary safety ratios, in my opinion. Of course, there's very good facilities, but there's a long tail. And we've got to provide more money for aged care. Now, we'll have more to say about our aged care policies. I will say that the government did say on budget night they're providing new places, but they actually just took them from residential care and transferred the money into home care.
Okay, I'm just going to quickly follow up. You got your hand up there. You wanted to hear about a Royal Commission, didn't you? So,
I did, Mr. Shorten. I think the parallels are quite evident.
Yeah.
The reasons that you supported and we eventually got a banking Royal Commission was the fact that every other inquiry into the banking sector was only ever going to be a fluff piece because we knew endemically there was issues. And I think no matter what inquiry, we've had a South Australian ICAC inquiry and we've had so many, that's the political next step is launch another inquiry.
Okay, I think we've got the point. We're going to take that as a comment. We'll get a quick answer, Royal Commission or no. Are you going to consider it?
Yeah, I will consider it. I'm fired up about this issue of aged care. I can't just cavalierly say we'll have a Royal Commission. I've got my colleagues to consult. We've got to look at, there's plenty of stakeholders in this.
You're saying you're going to go back and consult your colleagues about whether there should be a Royal Commission?
I hadn't finished what I was saying. Yep. What I was saying is I think it is an issue. I can't cavalierly announce it. But what I'm trying to convey to you is I think you've got a point. And aged care, be it the treatment of the staff, be it the funding model, be it the inspection standards, be it the interface with having, properly trained people, be it making sure there's just enough money, I think it's the tip of the iceberg.
All right. I'm sorry, we're going to have to move on. The next question's from Neola Noyorkis.
The Playford Council area had the Basics card introduced in 2012 under a Gillard government. Multiple studies have shown that the Basics card and its newer version, the cashless welfare card, increases stigma and causes hardship to those forced onto these cards and does not make their lives any better. The Labor Party has disappointingly supported continuing trials of these toxic policies which do nothing for the real issues of addiction and child abuse and paints every Centrelink client as irresponsible and not to be trusted. Will the Labor Party finally stand up and reject the cards and be a voice for the most vulnerable as it used to be?
Can we just, before, Neola, just stay with us a sec. Stay with us. Just a quick question for you. Do you have personal experience of using these cards or having been forced to use these cards?
I haven't been forced to use it, but I have had contact with a lot of people who have been forced onto the basics card. I've done a bit of activism with a few other people, and we hear how humiliating and degrading it is, especially for young people on the unreasonable to live at home allowance, especially in Playford, who were just shoved onto this card with no consultation. These are young people who've been looking after their own finances, sometimes 3 or 4 years.
All right, let's let Bill Shorten answer now. Thank you.
Thanks for your, what you said, and thanks for raising this issue. Currently, the government is rolling out a card, which the cashless card, where you don't get to spend the money. It's been introduced in 2 communities, in Ceduna and also up in Western Australia. Labor spoke to those communities when it was introduced. There were quite a lot of support, not unanimous support, to trial it there. And I don't think I'm just trying to finish it. I don't think the trials can be deemed to be a success yet. There are some people boosting it who say that they're a success. The government's then tried to extend it elsewhere in Bundaberg, also in Kalgoorlie. Labor's expressed opposition. I've met people there. It can't work if a community doesn't want it, and that really goes to the heart of one of the 2 points you made. The Labor Party is only interested in trying improvements in people's lives where the community are up for it. So when you said we must state our opposition, the trials are underway, and I've met community leaders who truly believe this is a good thing to do. But where the government's tried to extend it, we've said no, because we don't think the jury's back in, and we're not sure it is the success that people say it is. But you said something else which I've got to just go to. You said, when will the Labor Party stand up? In 2014, the government wanted to introduce a GP tax. We opposed it, and I can tell you, I remember the editorials of the newspapers after Mr Abbott and Mr Hockey proposed it. They said Labor should just get out the way and support that GP tax. I remember when the government, the coalition, wanted to introduce, while I was opposition leader, letting people who are unemployed not get the dole for 6 months. Labor opposed that. So we've got a good track record, but I've got no doubt there's plenty more for us to do. OK, we'll move on. Next question from Alice Crowley.
Bill Shorten, you have become well known for your unique use of zingers, dad jokes and eccentric metaphors. Despite opinion polls suggesting you are likely to win the next election, the same polls indicate that you are one of the most unpopular politicians in our country. Do you worry that these zingers and the coalition's Kill Bill strategy represent you as an untrustworthy and shifty character, thereby undermining your suitability as a potential Prime Minister?
No. As for the government's Kill Bill strategy, I mean, I think it speaks volumes, doesn't it? They say that to be Prime Minister of Australia, you've got to have a thick skin. I'll tell you what, the opposition leader's job's good training for it. I'll be ready for that. I think more seriously, the polls, I'm not consumed by the 30 polls. I think it was the other fellow who said 30 polls and you should give up your job as he sailed past that date. But to be fair, that's not the game here. That's not the issue here. Personal popularity is one challenge. But I tell you what is important. The job I've had since I was opposition leader, 1, unite the Labor Party. We're doing a bit better than we used to do. 2, be a strong opposition. Ask the banks if they find us a strong opposition. Ask Tony Abbott. Apparently we were so bad at our job they had to get rid of him. Ask Mr Turnbull if we're a strong opposition. We came very close in the last election. Strong opposition, united team, and I've got to say, my team is better than his team. And the other thing I'd just say is what people really want is they want to hear some strong decisions. I don't expect everyone in this amphitheatre to agree with everything I've said. That would be impossible. But what I think people do know is we've been willing to take serious economic reforms. We've debated negative gearing tonight. We've debated my commitment not to give a tax cut to the big banks, but rather probably fund schools and hospitals. So I genuinely, I get the debate and I get all the noise. What really matters is I want to lead a team which is united, which sticks to our values, and which also has a serious long-term agenda for Australia, which we do.
So just quickly, what are the polls actually telling you when you see Malcolm Turnbull becoming more and more popular in comparison to you?
Well, I know where I started, so anyway, it's been an up and down ride. But I tell you what, the polls also tell me, if you want to obsess about them, that any Saturday for the last 2 years, we'd have won the election. Now, of course, obviously there hasn't been an election held. So I take them all with a grain of salt. I think what people actually want in this country is they want a bit of long-term vision. They're a bit over the personalities and all the, the ups and downs and who's where, what. What people want in this country is, what are we going to do for you, the people? What's our long-term plan? That's what matters.
All right, well, there are some elections coming up very soon, as it turns out. We've got a question on that from Sean Evans.
G'day, Bill.
Hi, Sean.
Just a question in terms of the upcoming by-elections. How much influence do you think they'll have on the federal election coming up in the next 12 months? Do you think either a good or a bad result will swing the election either way for the federally?
I think they're important. That's why the Labor Party's running in all 5 seats. I think it is a chance for Australians to send a message. Do they want the big corporate tax cuts? Or do they want the cuts to hospitals? Or do they want to see a different set of priorities? This all comes down to, I think, your view about where this country's headed. Now, I think some of our headline numbers in this country are good. But what I get concerned about, where these by-elections are a chance for Australians to have their say, is I'm not sure that the benefits of this country are being as equally spread as they once used to. I look at things, and the reason why I fire up on penalty rates is because I think things are changing for the worse. The reason why I bang on about loss of apprenticeships and the importance of apprentices is I want parents to think that their kids can do an apprenticeship. So, in these by-elections, I think it's a great chance for people to decide which way do they want this nation to go. And I think at the general election, it will be a turning point, one way or the other. One way we'll back in the big corporate tax cuts. We'll have that theory that if you look after the top end of town, the benefits will trickle down, or there'll be an alternative. If we look after working and middle class people, make sure you can see a doctor, get a job, go to university, go do an apprenticeship, that you can grow old with some dignity. I think these are the debates.
All right, very briefly, do you accept the risk is all on your side? In other words, the risk is to you, Bill Shorten, and your credibility if you were to lose, historically, one of these by-elections.
Well,
what would be the implications for you? That's part of what the question's going to.
Well, if that's the test, then Mr Turnbull's already failed at it because he's not running in 2 of them.
No, we're talking about the ones that Labor might lose.
Yeah,
okay? There's at least 2 Labor could lose. If you lose one, it'll be the first time in history, won't it?
My point is, Mr Turnbull's already lost 2 because he didn't even turn up. What do you call it in a football carnival if one team doesn't turn up to play on the field?
OK, let's move on.
Who said Melbourne? Anyway.
We've still got quite...
I'm calling it. That was funny.
I don't think we're going to get an answer to that question.
Oh, no, straight up, Tony.
Yeah.
You guys want to you say politicians talk too much about themselves, and then, you'll spend half the show saying, what does it mean for you? The Labor Party is going to run hard in these by-elections. We're going to try our very hardest. And we're going to keep talking about standing up for our priorities and values.
All right, let's move on. Next question from Ashton Tabard.
Mr Shorten, my question is simple, and that is, can you now, on national television, promise to put an end to the indefinite detention of asylum seekers in Australia?
I'll tell you 2 things. One, and Ashton, you may or may not want to hear this, but I'm going to say it. What we're not going to do is have the boat start again and see hundreds of people drown at sea. I think it is legitimate for people to want to come to this country. I support a refugee intake. I don't think, and you've never seen me, and you can trawl through if you could be bothered, the last 20 years, I don't think it's bad of a person to want to come to this country. And I think it's a very brave thing for someone to up sticks and leave their own country and where they come from. But what I can't ignore is that when we have a policy which sees the people smugglers come across from Indonesia and 1,200 people drown, I'm not going to wash my hands of that and say, I don't care, it's just what happens to you here. But the second thing I'm going to say to you is, I don't believe the corollary of not having the people smugglers back in business is that you keep people in indefinite detention. I do not believe that we should be using people in Manus and Nauru as political scoring points for a debate in Australia. I do think that a lot more should be done to regionally resettle people. I do think there should be independent oversight. I don't believe that people's medical treatment should be used as some sort of political plaything and that if the doctors say that the medical treatment requires you come to Australia, well, that's where you should go.
So just to come back to his question, a very simple one. In fact, would you like to just ask it again, because we still didn't get an answer?
No, we heard it. You know that. And
that a yes?
Come on, let's go.
Well, is that a yes, is what he's saying?
I will
is
make
that
sure.
a promise to end indefinite detention?
I do not believe we need to have indefinite detention. I do not believe that is necessary to deter the people smugglers.
So do you promise to end it? That's the question.
Well, hang on a second. The issue here, Tony, is this. I don't have the regional resettlement agreements resolved. I do think the government should take a deal with New Zealand. I mean, I thought it was really cheap of the government to attack Labor for saying there should be a deal with New Zealand. They say that puts sugar back on the table for the people smugglers. Well, they're doing a deal with the US, which, by the way, I support. So, yes, I do not believe that indefinite detention should be the case. I believe a Labor government can actually make sure that we don't have to have people in Manus and Nauru, because we will prioritise resettling people.
Okay, there's one last question we have time for. One last question comes from Zoe Tan.
Mr. Shorten, Henry Ford failed and went broke 5 times before he succeeded with the motor car. Many of our best learn from their mistakes. How do you find the balance between maintaining integrity and giving our political representatives room to learn from honest mistakes and become wiser? And what is the biggest regret of your professional life?
I think the first part of your question, just you said about Henry Ford, and I get the regret bit, but what was the first part of your question again?
How do we find the balance between maintaining integrity and giving our political representatives room to learn from their honest mistakes and become wiser?
Well, that's a question for the nation, isn't it? When do you allow people, when do you say it's okay for politicians to say, I got that wrong? Well, that's a question actually for the whole of Australia, the whole of our media. I mean, we have a debate where if you change your mind, you're a flip-flopper. If you stick to a stupid position, you're an idiot. There's not a lot of room between the two, is there? I think it's up to all Australians. The way I will try and avoid that, and I'll come to the regret point in a moment, the way I'll try and avoid that is this. We'll put out our policies to the Australian people. I actually want to respect the intelligence of people by putting forward ideas. The way we will do that is we will explain what we want to see this country look like in a decade's time. What will we do in our first term? How will we pay for these things? What are our priorities? If we win the next election, it won't be because we've been a small target. So I think the way I can pay respect to all of you, and indeed the millions of other Australians who make up this great country, is put our policies forward. The other way we can pay a bit of respect is that we can be a united team. Now, in terms of regret, I think the times in my professional life where I haven't backed my own instinct more. You know, when you make the call and it's possible in this job to over-consult. You should always talk to smart people, but I really, for instance, wish that we'd pushed harder on a banking royal commission earlier than we did. I now look at what I've seen, and even though we pushed for it 2 years ago. So the times I regret is when I haven't backed my own instinct.
Was there a moment tonight where you didn't back your own instinct?
I didn't mind you interrupting me. No, the number of moments tonight, people asking like genuine questions, you get frustrated, you think, oh, this isn't quite what I want to hear, or he's just giving me a line. I tell you what, I loved going on this show. Not everyone might have loved hearing it and whatever, but this is more fair dinkum to me than half the rubbish we carry on in Parliament, so thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Now, that is all we have time for. That is all we have time for. Please thank properly our guest, the Opposition Leader, Bill Shorten.
Good job, Tony.
I'm still going. Thank you. Now, you can continue the discussion on Facebook. We've also asked the Prime Minister, Malcolm Turnbull, to join Q&A. We're hoping he'll be here to answer your questions soon. Next Monday, in the aftermath of the Trump-North Korea summit, Q&A will be joined by the Chair of the Foreign Affairs Legislation Committee, Senator Linda Reynolds, Labor up-and-comer Tim Watts, the CEO of the US Studies Centre, Simon Jackman, and Aubrey Blanche, the Global Head of Diversity at Australian software giant Atlassian. Until next week, good night.
set the agenda. Head to the Q&A website to register for our audio